Found footage. That's two words that either interests you or sets off every alarm in your body and makes you run screaming out of the room. Or possibly like my mom, makes you drink a bottle of Dramamine to get over the motion sickness. Well, I thought it was time to find which of them were the best of the best and which were dead last. And I chose 13 titles. And the ones that I picked were the ones that either made the biggest splash at the box office or got the most media attention. So these are sort of the most well-known examples, but are absolutely not all that the genre has to offer. One thing to mention is that I held true to the name, and I only went with films that fully used the found footage format. So they had to be presented as if they were tapes that were recovered after the fact. Mockumentaries weren't included, and I'll probably put those on a later list. And there was some like Hell House LLC that sort of straddled that line, so I didn't include those either. To get on this list, the whole film had to be in the style of found footage. So I sent that list out to my patrons, and these guys answered the call. And as usual, they put their favorite as number 1 and went down the list and put their least favorite here in dead last. I gave each first place entry 1 point, each second place 2 points, and so on and so forth until the dead lasts got 13 points. And with 42 entries, the best score would be 42 points, and the worst would be 546. So, let's dig up some tapes and see which of these are the best and which are dead last. And if you're not a fan of the format, I guess we'll see which of these are tolerable and which should have stayed lost. Coming in at dead last, at the bottom of the barrel here, there was one movie that ran away with the title since it was the first movie voted dead last, and it stayed on the bottom the whole time. And with 436 points, we have Blair Witch. This was ranked in dead last 7 times, and the highest score that it got was 4th place, which it took 1 time. And I had this in 12th place myself, so pretty close to dead last. And I saw this sucker in the theaters on opening night, and I was excited. A Blair Witch sequel from the guy who made You're Next and The Guest? Yes, please. And holy crap, did I walk away disappointed. So, look, if you're going to go back to the well with the Blair Witch, like, to me, you need to have a reason. At the time that they made this, the franchise had been dormant for quite a while, so I figure if you're going to make a new one, you're going to have something new to say or do. And then they just didn't. Like, so much of this film is just spent doing exactly what you would expect. But the problem is that 100 ripoff films had already done all of this. So you feel like you're just watching one of those. Like, to me, you're going to have to distinguish your film, a Blair Witch film, from the Blair Witch knockoffs by embracing the lore and stuff. And they do in like the final 10 minutes of the movie. And honestly, when you get to the point of every character has a camera strapped to their ears with perfect sound and just so happens to be looking directly at the right spot steadily, then what's the point? The point of found footage is to make it feel like you're watching reality. But the picture quality and sound quality and camera work is all so polished that you feel like you're watching a narrative film shot in a traditional manner. So in the end, it doesn't even feel like found footage. Throw in the fact that like 80% of the characters are hateable. Not just like they're not very likable. They seemed to purposefully make the main crew detestable jerks, and they're just not fun to watch. I will say that I do like the finale and the whole bit with crawling through the claustrophobic tunnel. That had my palms sweating. But it's way too little, way too late. But that one moment of having me nervous, and I guess it's because I don't like small spaces, that kept it out of my dead last.
Lisa, I'm so sorry.
Coming in at number 12, still very low on this here roster, and we have one that's not as high profile as some of these others, and with 398 points, it exists. Like Blair Witch, this also took the dead last spot 7 times, but was also put in first place once. And I guess I like this one a little more than most since I put this up in 7th place. And this came out at the same time as Willow Creek. And I feel like that one got all the attention and all the glory of being the found footage Bigfoot film. But it's crazy how dissimilar these two movies are. It's basically the anti-Willow Creek. And coming from Eduardo Sanchez, one of the directors of the original Blair Witch, I had high expectations. And it, like mostly delivered, I guess. But again, one of the most important parts of found footage films for me is the whole immersion aspect. I want to feel like I'm really there and experiencing things the way that these characters are. And part of that is the acting. And the other part is how it's filmed. And I've always thought that one of the biggest challenges of found footage is the entire notion of why are they still filming? And this one kind of breaks that since there seems to be cameras just everywhere and they're always rolling, even when it doesn't make much sense. Like the guy trying to get away on the bike makes sure to strap a GoPro to his head and another to the bike and then just make sure that they're running. Why? Another thing going against it is the characters, since too many of them are constantly competitive and arguing for no real reason. But in contrast to Willow Creek, there's more of them, so not everything rests on you liking or hating two people, since there's other people to focus on. And one thing that I do really enjoy is the action moments, and that Bigfoot suit. That thing looks great. And the couple of moments where it's fully in action are pretty cool. But it's a fairly solid little film, but it's one that I actually think might have benefited more from being a narrative film, shot in a traditional manner. This list was a little longer than most, so we're still all the way down with number 11, and we're still on the rougher end of things. And this movie took in 378 points, about 20 less than exists, and it's Unfriended, a movie that made 82 million worldwide at the box office, if you can believe that. It got dead last. This is going to sound familiar. 7 times, the same as both Blair Witch and Exists, and the best score that it got was 3rd place, which it got 3 times. And this one was my dead last, and whoo boy, do I not enjoy this film. The very idea of making your movie and titling the movie around current technology is a little tough because you really run the risk of feeling extremely dated. Like, I don't really think that people even use the term unfriended anymore. So right off the bat, like 10 years after this film was released, you've already lost some relevance. But as far as I know, this is the first sort of all on a computer screen feature film. There was definitely shorts done before this, but I think this was the first movie. And it's been shown that this format can be done well, like look at Searching. But yeah, this is not it. Like, there's a point in this movie where a character is just like,
Hey, just somebody let me know when it's over.
And I have never felt so seen by a movie line, because the roster of characters is just the most insufferable and obnoxious group of people I have had to endure in a long while. Everyone is always bickering and arguing, and you immediately just wonder how this group of people remain friends. And once they have this issue with a mystery person on their Skype call, they all just stay on and talk instead of just being like, all right, guys, we can't seem to get past this bug and maybe hacker staying on our call, so see y'all tomorrow. And there's just so many like flustering bits here. Like they watch the police come to their friend's house, and he says it's a 5250. And they're like, what's a 5250? But then pull up police codes and look up 5150. And they literally say 5250 and say it's a mental case, which is clearly marked 5150. So you're like, no, it's not. Look up 5250. And the deaths are just so silly and unintentionally hilarious. And the bit with the guy with his hand in a blender, I think is supposed to be shocking or something. But I laughed out loud at it. And I wish there was more like that in the movie, because at least I would be entertained by that goofiness. But the last straw is that at one point, there's a supposed shocking YouTube video playing. And on the sidebar, there's a thumbnail for a video of a cat doing a backflip. And this movie's greatest crime is not just showing me that instead.
Hey! Hey, guys! Hello!
Hey, hi.
Can you hear me?
Hey.
Something is happening.
Something? Can I tell you? Happening. It's happening right now.
Let's go down to our number 10 spot now. And this was, like, I guess, a little closer race since we dropped down into 369 points, only 9 points away from Unfriended. But instead, here, what do you know? It's the other Bigfoot-related entry, Willow Creek. I'm starting to feel like an echo here, but this was also put in dead last. Yep, 7 times. But this one was also put in first place once, just like Exists. And I ended up with this one in 6th place. And I'm so torn with this one because there's parts of this I love, but it also has, some problems. Like, first off, it's just jarring to me that Bobcat Goldthwait made this. Like, this movie was directed by Zed from Police Academy. He was riding high right here and put out a couple of fantastic indie movies, and holy crap were those great. So him then choosing to do a found footage Bigfoot movie, it's just weird. And here's the thing, it takes a long time to get any sort of Bigfoot related material. Everything before this is just this young couple riding around and talking to people about the Sasquatch and stuff, and the whole thing rides on their performances, and those are fine, but their characters are a little frustrating. And Jim isn't quite as annoying a character as, say, Mika from Paranormal Activity, but he's certainly up there. His decisions are a little on the bothersome side, and he's not as charming as I think that the character ought to be. The other weird thing that sticks out to me is Peter Jason. I know that it's not necessarily essential for everyone to be an unknown, although I admit that using actors that you don't see all the time helps with the whole immersion aspect of things. But then Peter Jason strolls into this one, and you're just like, oh yeah, this is a movie, and these are actors, and it pulls you out a little bit. But I will say this, the final 20 minutes of this movie are outstanding. And it's just such a great, tense series of events. The whole unbroken sequence of them in the tent feels like something real. It kept me on the edge all throughout. It's just a really great extended scene. Plus, the final shots are just flat out disturbing, and it's an image that has stuck with me for a while.
That girl seems pretty happy to be missing.
What's up?
Getting out of our double-digit entries now, we're dropping down to our number 9 movie. And this was a little bigger drop down, since this one had a 33-point gap. And with 336 points, we have Grave Encounters. And this one breaks our 7 times dead last pattern by only getting 2 rankings placing it there, but it did also get 1 first place spot as well. And I have this one in 8th place. And I guess this one's, I don't know, it's okay and all, but I just can't really distinguish it from the other 800 movies that have this exact same premise. Although, I guess this is the first of the whole paranormal team goes into a place that's meant to be haunted and actually is haunted, which is essentially the opposite of every single paranormal show ever. Every single one of those shows is this team going into a place and then having to really stretch to make it seem like there's something weird going on. So it's kind of fun that there's a string of movies where all these guys actually get to see ghosts. But I have to confess, because I think this is specifically a sort of goof on Ghost Adventures and Zach Baggins, and I've never watched that, and in fact haven't really watched any of those shows. As a guy who doesn't actually believe in ghosts, I think that they're silly because they're just always people going to a dark house and not finding anything, and then just either very clearly and obviously faking things, or just pretending like nothing is actually something. I've seen clips where they're like, ooh, this thing moved all on its own. And it's very obvious that there's someone hidden right beneath it who is moving it. And there's another character nearer to it with a camera, and their angle would be much more impressive. But of course, they don't use that one because it would show the person moving things. So I always think it's funny that there's an entire genre of films that are just like, yeah, but what if something really did happen? And this one, it's fine. It does some cool stuff, but honestly, it's a bit of the same old, but mostly with kind of unlikable characters. I guess the thing that sticks with me the most is how much it basically just takes the premise of the House on Haunted Hill remake and then drapes a found footage format over it. It's an old hospital where the doctors were conducting terrible experiments on the patients, and they revolted, and now their ghosts are haunting the hospital. Same.
How come you're in here?
Headed down to our number 8 entry now, and this was another moderate drop down since it fell down to 307 points, a 29-point drop. And we've got The Taking of Deborah Logan. This got put in dead last one time, the smallest amount of any film so far, but was also ranked in first place twice, the highest amount of any film so far. And that might all seem somewhat favorable for this one, but I don't really share that opinion since I have it down in 11th. When I first saw this one, I was pretty excited about it because it had gotten a lot of buzz. People seemed to really like it, but I remember watching it and thinking, And then I promptly forgot it existed. And the only time I knew it was a real movie was the occasional time that I would see the gif of the one actually memorable moment that occurs. And so this was my first rewatch since then. And this is about a decade old at this point. And yeah, now I remember why I was unimpressed. This was 2014 and came out after most of the flicks on here. And honestly, by this point, I feel like this whole thing had already been done. There had been several exorcism-related found footage movies by this point, including The Last Exorcism and a handful of low-budget numbers. So for this to stand out, it would have to do something different. And it doesn't. I go so far as to say that it doesn't do a single thing different than any of the movies that came before it. It's basically just a checklist of all of the standard possession movie tropes, one by one. They go to the doctor, and they don't know what's happening. They get a sound sample, and she's speaking in a language she shouldn't know. And look, it's well done enough, and the acting is all fine, but it's just repetitive as hell. And there's nothing you haven't seen a million times. And like 80% of this movie is just like, isn't an old person acting like an old person scary? But I hate to tell you, actual Alzheimer's and actual dementia is about 10 times scarier than anything this film is giving you. When I went to the hospital to visit my grandfather before he passed, and he had no idea who I was and thought that I was the janitor, and I didn't get a chance to say goodbye to him because he couldn't even understand who I was. If I had actually discovered that it was a literal demon possessing him that made that happen, instead of just a thing that the human brain does and will likely also happen to me when I get older, I think I'd have felt relieved. And oh man, thank goodness it's just a demon. Plus, the so-called spooky look that the little girl gives the camera at the ending is one of the more unintentionally hilarious things in this list. I was really curious about how this next one would do, since I feel like this is one of the more divisive films in horror, and I think it's pretty appropriate based on that it would land right around the middle of the list. And at number 7, with 291 points, it's the original Paranormal Activity. And it got, oh look, we're back here again. It got 7 dead last votes, but also took first place 4 times. And see, I told you people were split on this one. And I guess I'm on the lower end of the spectrum with this one since I had it in 9th. And I think this is the franchise that everyone loves to hate at this point. But it keeps chugging along. I think it's also easy to forget just how big a deal this was. It unseated Saw as the franchise du jour for a while. And I saw this in the theater and remember pretty distinctly that there was this kid in front of me that was really into it and jumping and freaking out. And it was hilarious and it made the whole thing better. But I know that there's now a bit of backlash to this one, and there's definitely those out there that straight up hate it. And I can't get that mad at it. To be honest, I think it's a perfectly fine film. It does what it does, and it does it well enough, and it sort of set the bar for the whole found footage for people experiencing supernatural stuff in their house genre. Tons and tons of films after this tried the whole formula to various degrees of success, but this was the first to really get any attention. And the best thing I can say about it is that it does feel real. If the dialogue is scripted, it comes across as extremely natural. But I would guess that there wasn't a strict script and merely an outline, as the acting is very improv feeling, which works in its favor. With the exception of this psychic that arrives. The scene where he wants to flee the house is one of the most unintentionally funny bits I've seen in a long time. But the biggest issue it has is that its sort of main character is Mika. He's just one of the worst characters in horror because I think he's not meant to be. I think he's meant to still be likable, even though he's making these bad decisions, and he's just not. He makes every bad choice, and the entire movie is essentially his fault. And with a halfway decent human being in the house, this would be about 10 minutes long. That said, it's also a bit on the dull side. Very dull, since it's all in one house. Way too much of this is just static shots of people sleeping with nothing really happening. I don't find it that scary, and I never did. But that kid at the theater, he did. He sure did.
This is overpowering.
It's getting worse.
Yes, it certainly doesn't like that I'm here, and I cannot help you.
What?
In fact, I've got to get out of here. This thing is very aggravated, the fact that I'm here.
Wait. Everybody calm down. We need your help.
Well, I've got to tell you, I am not the person to help you in this situation. This is not my area of expertise.
Okay, this was our closest call here, since only a single point separated our number 7 and number 6 movies, because this one had 290 points, narrowly sneaking by PA with the very last ranking I received. And it's The Last Exorcism. This one was put in dead last only 2 times, but it was equally put in first place 2 times. And I guess it's appropriate that this was so close to Paranormal Activity, since I had them very close as well, since I put this one in 10th, one place lower than I had that one. So, right off the bat, you're giving me one of the most tired tropes of all of supernatural horror. The lapsed religious guy who will shortly have it revealed that demons are real after all. Oh no, I'm a priest and I've lost all my faith, but luckily I will shortly have events show me how wrong I was to arrive at that decision, which is something that happens in real life as frequently as ghost hunting shows encounter real hauntings. But then it throws a curveball by being character-driven and well done, and you're sort of along for the ride. And it seems like it's going to be a nice story about how exorcisms really are, and there's this focus on the troubles that this girl is facing in life. And honestly, there's nothing really supernatural happen, and the movie doesn't try to play it overly spooky. I actually started getting invested in this for a while, since it seemed like it was going down this road of exposing how these supposed exorcisms are basically mostly cases of psychosis and placebo effects. And you have this character that's along for the ride with the scamming, but then realizing that it's a better tactic to approach this from a rational level. And that's interesting, even if their presentation of it kind of isn't, and it borders on being overly dull, but it's not bad for quite a while. And then there's the ending. It just throws up its hands and says, whatever, and drops the ball super hard. It literally tosses aside every single thing that it had kind of established in terms of the tone and themes and goes for a cheap shock. The way they end this just doesn't make any sense when compared to everything leading up to it, and it kind of ruins any of the goodwill that the movie had earned up until this point.
Now!
We're getting closer to the top side here, and the points are starting to drop, and our number 5 movie fell 25 points down to 265, and it's as above, so below. This was only put in the dead last spot 1 time, and got an equal amount of placements in the number 1 spot. And I have this one in 5th place, and I know that seems on the higher side of things, but I do have some genuine issues with this one. There's some aspects to this that are pretty original, and the whole treasure hunting angle they roll with is something that you didn't see too frequently. In a world of like 7,000 found footage ghost hunting shows, it's nice to have one that's like, I don't know, treasure hunters. Also, using the French catacombs as a setting is different than the others, and it's nice to see a location that's more unique, and also one that has some basis in reality. Again, so many found footage films are giving you 2 things: shaky cam in the woods, or a shaky cam in a house. So it's nice to get a different vibe, and one that's more claustrophobic and puts you in some tight spaces. And damn, based on what I said about that bit in Blair Witch and some of the segments here, I guess it seems like I'm claustrophobic, but I'm not, really. Although I will say that I guess I'm really freaked out about enclosed caves. Like, I can go down a narrow hallway or be in a tiny closet, and I won't get freaked out. But the idea of being underground in a little tunnel, yeah, I guess I'm freaked out by that. But this one has two things going against it. For one, the characters make the dumbest choices every single time. Every time that someone is like, don't do this or else someone might die, they go right ahead and do it. And I know that's often pretty needed to keep your horror movie going. And I know that that's also accurate to real life. Let's face it, if you had real people and tell them, hey, please don't do this thing, it's bad, you know that 7 times out of 10 those people are doing that thing. So I'm not sure why it stands out so much in movies, because it's absolutely reflective of reality. The other thing that holds it back is the acting, which is very much movie acting. It's not bad acting, it just never feels real. And it never seems like reality. But the whole final act of this one is just straight up wild and different, and that's worth the trip. It's like this movie just hits this point and is like, buckle up, because it's straight up insanity from here on in. And it totally works for me, and is both entertaining and exciting, and that whole sequence is what made me put it up higher. Going down to number 4 now, and this was our first pretty big jump down in terms of points, since it dropped a full 41 points down to 224, and it's Cloverfield, the found footage kaiju. This is the first film on the roster to not get a single dead last vote, and the worst score that it received is 12th place, although it did get that 3 times. But it also got put into first place 7 times, significantly more than any of the films we've seen so far. And I've got this one pretty high as well, since I put this one in 3rd. And this one gets some points right off the bat. For me, for one thing, it seems like most of these things all have really similar setups. Like, a group of people head off to some remote location, get lost, and argue a bunch, and end up getting killed off one by one, usually by some loosely defined supernatural presence. Like, Cloverfield switches that up by giving us a whole different feel. It's giving you this standard format, but with a kaiju film as the backdrop. You're taken away from that whole, we're stuck in the woods, or we're stuck in this big building, and giving the characters a whole damn city as their backdrop. That gives the film this whole different scope. And also, I have to tell you, it may feel different now, but this came out in 2008. Having it set in New York City really played with that whole 9/11 trauma aspect. I remember feeling that as I was watching this film the first time, although I don't quite retain that now. But the whole concept of seeing buildings and landmarks in New York get destroyed on the big screen had a bigger effect shortly after seeing it go down in real life. Here's the weird sticking point with me with this one, because I think one of the most crucial aspects of found footage is the performances. Again, these things live or die on how real they feel, and if your actors feel like they're acting, you get pulled out of it. And everyone in this movie is acting like they're in a movie, and it never feels like reality. I mean, there's a distinct difference between how people talk in movies and how they talk in real life, and this never feels like real life. It wouldn't stick out if this was a narrative film, but since it's found footage, it's plain as day. And that may have taken it down a bit in terms of how I rank it, but then there's those action sequences, and that's what really draws me in here. As a fan of kaiju films, I love it when they can make me feel the weight of something as insane as a giant monster walking through a city and the destruction that it causes. And this does that. Those scenes on the street, interacting with the effects of the creature, are fantastic and pulled me right in.
What is that?
It's a terrible thing.
Okay,
Let's
we
go.
gotta go.
Here we go, top 3 time, the heavy hitters of the genre. And coming in at number 3, with not a massive drop down to 209, 15 points less than Cloverfield, it's Creep. This is another that didn't get any dead last votes, and the worst score that it got was 11th place, which it got 3 times. But it also got first place, but only 1 time. And I have this one pretty close to where it landed. I have this in 4th, so I just had this and Cloverfield flip-flopped. And, you know, the plot and story of this one is really nothing to write home about. It's a very simple, stripped-down concept that's essentially just 2 guys up in a cabin together. And it was so low budget And so no frills. And no one has ever said what the budget was, but it is like said that it was like $5,000 or less. The location was actually Mark Duplass's house, and a bunch of the script was just improvised. So it was as much an experiment as the Blair Witch Project, ultimately. And what's weird is that this sort of bare bones project is normally what you would see from someone just starting out. But Duplass was already a solid name by this point. Besides indie acclaim for doing small stuff like The Puffy Chair, he had already graduated to bigger projects. So you get the feeling like this was just something for fun. And seeing how basic level that this whole production and the story is, so much of it, and I mean like 90% of it, rides on Duplass's performance. And he very easily could have brought this whole thing down. But he just nails this. He's equally charming, disturbing, off-putting, pathetic, and straight up scary. But I have one major problem with this one, and it's the third act. So much of the tension and the drama of this one rests on the whole two guys stuck in a cabin deal. But once Patrick is able to leave and go home, the logic gets spread a little thin. Besides the fact that he can't seem to find anyone to help him out, besides the fact that he seems to have no spatial awareness and hears a sound in his house and stands with his back to the door where Aaron is just there, but Patrick is so intent on looking in one direction that he can't see him, then the concept of going out to meet your stalker by a lake with no backup and then just stare off into the distance, that kind of loses me.
I mean, it just seemed dumb that you would just sit there.
I agree. But it's those moments that break the reality. It's so clear that Patrick is looking one particular way because of how the scene needs to go, and you realize that it's staged that way, so it takes you out of the reality. But that doesn't take away that for a large portion of this film, it's very engaging and pulls you right in.
Joseph, please let me go.
Our number 2 film here is another one that I was really curious how people would feel about, because I know people who love this one, and I know people who just hate it. But at number 2, with 172 points, it's The Blair Witch Project. This was put in dead last one time, but was also put in first place 12 times, the highest amount of any film on this list, and even more times than our number 1 film. And I've got this one right where it sits because this was also my number 2 film. And let's face it, there's no way to deny that this movie had a massive influence over the genre overall. Sure, it's not the first film to try this format. You can't call this the first found footage film or whatever, but you sure as hell can say that it set the bar and defined what the genre would become. It more or less established a set of rules for what films like this would become. In terms of the film itself, though, I like to think of this one on a curve because this one has been knocked off so many times, and there were countless imitators and parodies and such, and the average person approaching this movie has no chance of just experiencing it brand new. But as someone who saw this on the theater on opening night, I can safely say that I was all in. I wasn't quite as all in as the people in the lobby after it was over who were convinced it was real and freaking out that it all happened to actual people, but I was pretty all in. And that's the key here. A good deal of how found footage is effective is how much it's able to convince you that what you were seeing was real. And considering that there was a large debate as to whether or not this actually was real means that it was pretty damn effective. And in the end, this is a movie that you either get or you don't. Now, keep in mind, I'm not saying that like, oh, if you don't like this one, then you don't get it or understand it. I mean, that when watching it, some people are going to be affected by what they see and others are not. It either evokes that feeling of dread in you or it doesn't. I happen to be one of the people that it does. And I think part of how much you like this one is how much you're looking for an actual movie. But this one doesn't exactly work like that. It's more of an experiment. If you put this on with the mindset of not watching a movie and instead are just watching the found tapes of people that were lost, it works better. And I think it still holds up.
I am so sorry.
That leaves us with one film to be number one, and it's a movie that we've previously had on the Dead Last roster, since this was also on the zombie movie list, and it was number 3 there. But at number 1 here, with a mere 148 points, we're looking at Wreck. This one also didn't get any dead lasts, and the worst ranking it got was 10th place, which it only got once. And it had 10 first place nods, which may be 2 less than the Blair Witch Project, but the ratings were more consistently high. And this was also my number 1, and I'm super into this flick. And I guess I should point out that the actual title of this movie is supposed to be Record, and the whole Wreck thing was just the abbreviation for record that shows up on video cameras, but it just became more commonly known as Wreck, since that's what shows on the poster and title instead of the full thing. And of course, because of that red circle beforehand that looks like an O, Christy would always refer to this one as O-Wreck. And yeah, this is just the perfect blend of all of this, and it's exactly what I'm looking for in a found footage movie. This is that exact happy medium. First of all of the actors feel like they're not acting. I don't know if it's improv or not, but it feels like it. And if it's not, then it's perfectly done to feel like things are natural. It's very possible that it being in a different language helps with that, but even with that, it feels real. It also manages to dodge the whole aspect of, why don't they just put the camera down? There's a point later on in the movie that seems like it would be beneficial to not have a video camera in hand, but the movie does a pretty expert job of giving them a reason to keep it going. And you never really question it. But then it's got a fresh and original tale to tell. The conceit of it being a TV news camera guy and journalist feels fresh, and the apartment complex is an original location. The whole site of the central staircase and all the individual small apartments gives it this original feeling. I know that zombies are a bit stale now, and I like that this one throws some different stuff into the mix. And even if they, really run with the whole demonic element way more in the sequel, it's first touched on here and adds this whole other aspect to this movie. And I'm glad it's number 1, and it takes the place as the best found footage flick around.
Closed off and they won't let anyone near the building, and my daughter needs antibiotics, okay?
So there you have it, 13 found footage movies, and I'm not too upset about any of this, but let's take a look at where everything ended up. And I'm okay with this. There's nothing on here that really frustrated me and made me say, wait, why is that so low, or why is that so high? I'm pretty fine with most of these. I'm also not really terribly invested in most of these movies, except for the ones near the top. So I can take it or leave it. Let me know what you would have put these at down below. Let me know what was your number 1. Let me know what was your dead last. And just know that you can also participate in these rankings. We send in rankings every single month on my Patreon, on patreon.com/movie timelines. And every single month we post up a list of movies that are going to be featured. You can then watch them, rank them, and send it in. And you can be on the list of people that send these numbers in. Go ahead and do that if you want to. But you can also, hit that like button. It's always recommended. Hit the subscribe button so you know when more videos go up. And, check out patreon.com/movie timelines. Even if you don't want to rank the movies, even if you just want to help support the channel, I'd appreciate that. And I'll see you very shortly for another great video. Thanks a lot, guys. Bye-bye.